Chapter 4 The Spy in the Jaguar. Aldrich Ames, known as Rick, was born in River Falls, Wisconsin in May 1941. His father, Carlton, was an academic who was recruited into the CIA and moved to Washington with his family after his doctorate about Burma caught the agency's attention. Aldrich Ames was sent to Burma in 1953 as a NOC, an officer with non-official cover. During 2 years in Rangoon, his son Rick got his first taste of a foreign environment. Back in Washington, Aldrich Ames got summer jobs at CIA for 3 years, then joined the agency full-time as a clerk typist. He earned a bachelor's degree in history at George Washington University, completed his training to become a spy, and was assigned to the Soviet division. He married Nancy Segabarth, a fellow spy, in 1969. That same year, Ames was assigned to Ankara, where his wife also worked for the CIA under Army cover. After Ankara, Ames worked in counterintelligence in the Soviet division at headquarters for 4 years, and was then sent to New York City. There he helped to handle a big fish, Arkady Shevchenko, the Undersecretary of the United Nations. In 1975, after letting a contact know that he wanted to defect, Shevchenko was handed a note and told to go to a bookstore near the UN. A CIA case officer was waiting. 2 years later, Ames took over as Shevchenko's handler. They drank a lot of vodka together. In 1978, Shevchenko was summoned home. Never a good sign. He insisted it was time to defect. Carrying a suitcase in the rain, he walked down the fire stairs behind his apartment building. A CIA car whisked him away to a new life in the U.S. 3 years later, Ames was assigned to Mexico City. His wife had left the CIA, had her own career, and did not go with him. It was in Mexico City that he met Rosario Casas Dupuy, a vivacious cultural attaché at the Colombian embassy. She was recruited as an access agent by the CIA mostly for the use of her apartment, for which she was paid $200 a month. She and Ames dated, and soon after his tour ended, she joined him in an apartment in Falls Church, in Northern Virginia. After Ames obtained a divorce, they were married in August 1985. In Mexico, Ames had been drinking heavily, and the chief of station recommended he have counseling. But back at headquarters, he had only 1 session with the counselor. Alcohol abuse was not uncommon in the CIA, and the agency did not always regard it as a serious problem. Ames faced financial pressures from the divorce settlement, a new car loan, a bank loan, and mounting credit card debts. But in his new job as chief of the CIA's Soviet counterintelligence branch, he had access to a vast range of secrets that offered a ready source of cash, if he risked selling them to the Soviets. As part of his duties in his new job, Ames began having meetings authorized by the CIA with Soviet embassy officials in Washington. The hope was that he might recruit a source inside the embassy. In December 1984, he started lunching with Sergei Chuvakin, an embassy officer. On April 16, 1985, after fortifying himself with several drinks, Ames walked into the Soviet embassy and left a letter addressed to Stanislav Andreevich Andrasov, the KGB resident. He provided his true identity, title, and biographical details. He revealed his position as CIA chief of the Soviet counterintelligence branch. That information alone was pure gold to the KGB. Ames asked for $50,000. A month later, he returned to the embassy and was taken to a private room. Viktor Cherkashin, the counterintelligence chief, entered and handed him a note saying that the Soviet spy service had agreed to pay him the money. On June 13, 1985, Ames wrapped up almost 7 pounds of secret documents in plastic bags and walked out of the CIA's headquarters in Langley, Virginia. He was not searched. He drove across the Potomac River to Washington and walked into Chadwick's restaurant in Georgetown. Chuvakin was waiting. Ames handed him the plastic bags crammed with documents that revealed the intelligence agency's deepest secrets. The documents contained, in Ames's own words, the identities of virtually all Soviet agents of the CIA and other American and foreign services known to me. 10 of those were executed. For this and other secrets he passed to the Russians for 9 years, Ames was paid, or promised, $4.6 million. That he had caused the death of 10 Soviets working for the CIA and the FBI did not seem to bother Ames in the least. They were taking the same risks as he did, he said. By the fall of 1985, the CIA was in crisis. One after another, its sources around the world were rolled up, and in time the 10 sources were executed, including 2 who had been recruited by the FBI. At first, the CIA suspected a communications breach. It did not then know the unpalatable truth that the agency harbored a traitor in its ranks. In July 1986, Ames began a 3-year tour in Rome. He continued to feed secrets to the KGB, stashing almost $1 million in 2 Swiss bank accounts. After he returned from Rome, no one seemed to notice that he drove into CIA headquarters in a red XJ6 Jaguar every day, or that he now wore expensive Italian suits and shoes. But in October 1986, the CIA set up a small, highly secret mole hunt team headed by Jean R. Vertefeuille, a gray-haired, grandmotherly counterintelligence officer whose unassuming appearance concealed an acute analytical mind and an extraordinary gift for remembering details. She had never married. The CIA was her life. She lived alone in a condo in McLean, so close to Langley headquarters that she walked to work each day. At first glance, she might have seemed an unlikely choice to hunt down the most dangerous mole in the history of the CIA, but there was hardly a KGB case she did not know. She could link old cases to new ones that might crop up decades later in a different part of the globe, with KGB operatives using different names. For years, she had toiled inconspicuously in the research section of the Soviet division and the counterintelligence staff. She liked to work in quiet obscurity. She preferred the anonymity that went with her job. Within the agency, there were some who compared her to John le Carré's fictional Connie Sachs, the brilliant woman researcher who knew all the Soviet cases and embodied the institutional memory of the circus. But Vertefeuille did not encourage such talk. There were cynics in the CIA, long a male-dominated hierarchy, who thought the job of finding the mole might have deliberately been given to a woman because the agency deep down did not really want to find the traitor, with all the negative publicity that would result. By this egregious and flagrantly sexist reasoning, appointing Vertefeuille was a safe choice rather than naming a man to head the unit. They didn't want to know, one intelligence official said of the agency's leaders. If you find a mole, you have to deal with him. It becomes embarrassingly public. Uncovering the mole would mean the CIA would become the butt of cartoonists, late-night television comics, indignant newspaper editorials, and congressional calls for investigations and reform. If the mole hunters did not succeed, all that could be avoided. The CIA is a bureaucracy, and the work of the mole hunt team went slowly. A lead investigator was pulled off and assigned to other duties for months. Perhaps the pace was slow because of the CIA's unpleasant memory of a previous mole hunt. For 20 years, from 1954 until 1974, James J. Angleton, the chief of counterintelligence, had succeeded in tying the agency in knots seeking a mole. It had begun in 1961, when a KGB officer, Anatoly Golitsyn, defected in Helsinki. He warned the CIA that there was a high-level mole inside the agency, and that later defectors would be sent to discredit him. 3 years later, Yuri Nosenko, a second KGB officer, defected in Geneva. Angleton put his faith in Golitsyn. Nosenko, whom Angleton regarded as a dispatched agent of the KGB, was jailed and interrogated by the CIA for more than 4 years, under horrible conditions. Most of the time in a windowless concrete cell built for him at the farm, the agency's training ground near Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia. He was drugged 17 times and sleep-deprived. In the end, Nosenko was rehabilitated and made a consultant to the CIA. A dispute over the two defectors split the CIA apart. Dozens of careers of loyal officers were damaged by Angleton's dark suspicions, and the work of the Soviet division ground to a halt. 3 officers falsely accused by Angleton's team because of Golitsyn's warning were eventually compensated by Congress under a law known, sardonically inside the agency, as the Mole Relief Act. Finally, Angleton was fired by CIA Director William E. Colby, who confessed not to understand the CI chief's convoluted theories of finding a mole under every rock. But that was in the past. Vertefeuille and her team kept working away, and finally, late in 1992, Sandy Grimes, a member of Vertefeuille's team, found a correlation between bank deposits by Ames and his meetings with Chuvakin, the Russian embassy official. She discovered that right after their luncheons, Ames made cash deposits into his bank account. The mole hunters were hopeful that the net was finally closing around Aldrich Ames, but they were not certain he was the traitor. The hunt was complicated by the fact that there were other suspects on the CIA and FBI list. Despite the strong circumstantial evidence, more was needed to arrest and prosecute Ames.